Ostensibly, this is a video about the birth of philosophy, but in reality it is a video about the death of Western civilization and what we can do about it. Or more specifically, what do we do now that essentially Western civilization has either died or is beyond redemption. I mean, it's time to build the next one, essentially. This is a book by Porphyry. This is the French translation. This edition includes two works. One is called Letter to Marcella. It's his most famous. And the other is Life of Pythagoras, Pythagoras. And that is the main book I will be talking about. Porphyry was a disciple of Plotinus. He's the one who put together the Enneads. He was so a Neoplatonician, and he was a very important figure for that reason in the shape that philosophy would take in the Christian era all the way up to today. But it was only when I read this one, The Life of Pythagoras, that I really understood just how profound the divide between what I thought philosophy was and what it actually is, just how deep that divide was, right? And again, I probably mentioned this before, but I did not want to make this video, and I don't think you want to hear it. You're not going to like it. But here I am. Okay. The gist of my topic today is that there is a deep spiritual core to Western civilization, which we have mostly lost touch with, which isn't religious, but which is something to do with our relationship to, you know, life, the universe, and everything, to quote Douglas Adams. So there's that in philosophy, which is, you know, supported by the text. It's just that we don't read them, and we don't want to acknowledge that the story we're telling ourselves about philosophy and about civilization, Western civilization, and the progress and all these things, we don't want to acknowledge that it's just a story and that it might be wrong. So there's that. And one crucial detail about philosophy and the reality of what it is that it's linked with shamanism. And shamanism is part of the birthright of humanity, and we have mostly divorced ourselves from it, and that has had catastrophic repercussions. Shamanism is part of the spirituality I'm talking about, but it's not the whole thing. It's associated with it. It's part of that metabolism. It's part of that, you know, infrastructure, that ecosystem, but it's not the whole thing. It's a key component, but not the whole thing. So a little bit about me, because it will help frame the general topic, which again is about the origin of philosophy and something about its true nature and the current state of civilization, and again what we can do about it. Okay. So my name is Christian Maltais. I'm a Québécois, and I usually describe myself as a poet and philosopher, because it's simpler to say that than to go into all the details. But I have had what I can only describe as shamanic training. I have had that sort of life, like traditional being, sort of quote unquote initiated, if you like, by life. And a lot of that came because I'm a musician and an artist, and I write songs, and I wanted to perform the songs powerfully. And I hadn't seen a theater actress when I was in my early 20s explain how she had become so charismatic, which she was, like tremendously, astoundingly charismatic. And her show was about that. And I guess the two main components of her teaching at that time was that, first of all, it had to do with the body and being present in your body. So that's one thing. And the other part was she became that good an actress, that powerful a stage presence, because she went so far in training that she reached a stage where she kind of gave up. But what that story is really telling is that life broke her. And it broke the image she had of what it meant to be a stage actress. And having broken her conception of herself, that allowed the consciousness of the body, if you like, to develop. And the consciousness of the body means being aware of what you're feeling right now. So, and ultimately, there's a big technical aspect to that, which I won't go into. But if you want to be a good stage performer, the trick really is to be fully present to what you're actually feeling in the moment, like physically and emotionally, which to all intents and purposes is the same thing. Like a physical sensation and an emotion, they're so intertwined that there's no real sense for most intents and purposes to there's no point in differentiating them. Like they're essentially the main thing as far as we're concerned. So if you want to be a good stage performer, what you need to learn to do is to be fully present in your body and whatever it is you're doing, like the text you're saying or the song you're playing. You need to be saying that text or singing that song or playing that piece of music from a state of full awareness of what is going on in your body. Okay? So that entails letting go of the resistance that we hold, the tons of resistance actually that we hold, which is old baggage, old wounds, and a lot of which I guess we tend to call the ego, all that stuff that constrains us. But as it turns out, doing that work is pretty much the same thing as shamanic training. Like the effect is the same. The basics of it, anyway. Because shamanism essentially means being in contact with the spirit world, and the way you learn to be in contact with the spirit world is by listening to the body and being present, being present. So again, short version, okay, but that certainly plays a big part in it. You need to learn to differentiate between, make the difference between your thoughts and your reactions, your like knee-jerk reactions, your fear reactions, all these things, and like the different voices in your head, where they might be coming from, and so that's a big part of it. And because you need to do that, because you want to be sure that you interpret the messages of the spirit world in the most efficient way possible, if you like. Like you want to get it the least wrong possible, okay? You don't want to misinterpret the messages, and you want to be aware of them, because you're always receiving them. And this is not about like being a shaman, which is a whole other thing. Like every human being on earth is always being sent messages from the spirit world. And we don't want to hear that, because we have learned as a society and a civilization that either the spirit world doesn't exist and crazy, foolish people believe in it, or that it is evil. And both of these assumptions, again, are catastrophic for humanity and for the spirit world, So it's one of the mistakes we made. So usually I don't talk about this, on a philosophy channel, because, I don't want to appear foolish and ridiculous, I want people to respect me. I don't want people to throw tomatoes, But, we're way beyond that now. way beyond. We're way past that stage. So, and I have to mention the shamanism thing, because, again, I got the intuition to create. I got the intuition to start learning philosophy, like the strong intuition that I needed to do that. I got that. I had always had that desire, certainly since my 20s, but I never could figure out how to go about doing that, learning philosophy, and for various reasons, going to university and that topic wasn't an option for me. So I had to learn how to do it by myself, and I tried many approaches for decades, and I ended up deciding that I would just read the whole thing. I would just start from antiquity and make a list of the main philosophical works that were associated with the topics that interested me, and I would just read the whole thing. Okay, so that was my approach. Learn philosophy by reading, the damned works. And I started with the pre-Socratics, so I read those, Empédocle and Heraclitus and Parmenides and all these people. And then I moved on to Plato, read the whole Plato, moved on to Aristotle, read the whole Aristotle, so I did that. And for the last, few months, I've been reading Plotinus, so the Enneads, and like the Stoics, mainly the Romans. And it hasn't been progressing as much as I wanted, so that's a topic for another day. But the fact is that I discovered that I was very interested in not so much Plotinus himself, though he has grown on me for the reasons I will mention in this video. But I discovered I was very, very, very interested in the much lesser known philosophers, like between Aristotle and Plotinus, like the Porphyrys, for instance, and all those authors. I just found them super interesting. There was a whole bunch of texts I wasn't aware of, more than I thought. There were more of them. So it was just exciting. It was good, fun, like geeky fun. But I had one question in my mind. I was doing all that, reading, and I made an error. You see, I made a very basic error when I built my corpus and I started reading, which is I didn't ask myself, what does philosophy mean, right? Where did it actually start? Who was the first person who called himself a philosopher? And I kind of figured I didn't need to ask at that when I started, and I guess I didn't. But eventually, it caught up with me, and I looked around, and there was one interpretation given by Diogène Laërce. I don't know the English pronunciation, but very famous for his life of philosophers. And I forget who he gives as the first philosophers. I think he mentions two people. But the other name we have for the first philosopher is Pythagoras. And so I knew that Porphyry had written a life of Pythagoras, so I was very curious to read it. And I read it like last week, and this had a shattering effect on my on my life, like positively, like on my relationship to everything, really. So, first of all, I had read Plato, and I had not liked Plato at all. I thought he was pulling his ideas, let us say, out of a hat. I might mention from somewhere else, but I thought he was just, he was writing well. I like how he wrote, obviously. He's famous for that. And his characters are great. He's mostly writing dialogues. So he's very, very, very good as a, as a writer of plays, actually, as a writer. But I had a lot of issues with his doctrine and like the whole idea of the Platonic ideas, the realm of the ideas, which is the idea that everything in existence comes from a spiritual realm, and everything in existence is like a projection of the absolute ideas in the spiritual realm. And I still don't think this is factually true. Okay, I haven't, suddenly realized that, the Platonic ideas are actually a real thing. I do not believe that. But I have changed my mind somewhat, in as much as I do entertain now the idea that he was at least onto something metaphorically. Okay, and that's also a topic for another day. But the thing is that the thing I had missed about Plato is that there is good reason to believe, in fact, that he was a disciple of Pythagoras. And because, of the way he talks about geometry, and because of how he presents the ideal political regime in the Republic and the laws, which I had read as a form of a theocracy based on Plato's doctrines, which on a certain reading it is. I think it's a fair reading on my part, but I had missed the other part, which is that so Plato was putting forth the idea that the ideal state is one that is governed by not necessarily philosophers, but people who are trained in philosophy by philosophers. Because you don't have to be a professional philosopher, but you have to have that level of philosophical training, essentially. And he has a whole, series of religious or spiritual, if you like, beliefs that he puts in there, and he thinks the ideal ruler, philosophers should be able to see the spiritual rays of the person, and lots of stuff I still don't believe in at all. I think it's not true and harmful as a doctrine. But based on my reading, I had believed that I had come to believe, based on the notes and the prefaces, introductions in the works, and just reading around on Wikipedia and just the general culture, I had come to the conclusion that the regime that Plato was putting forth had never existed, that there had never been a city based on a philosopher king, essentially, right? And in fact, I learned when reading this, Porphyry's Life of Pythagoras, that there was such a regime, like basically 100 years before Plato, and it was the city of Pythagoras, right? And it lasted about 10 years, and it has a lot of similarities with Plato's political doctrine, most notably the communism, like not the same communism we know of now, but it's a fair name for it. The idea that everybody would put everything in common. So that was one of the core doctrines of, like the core principles of Pythagoras's city. And eventually that led to their downfall, because there was some, political brouhaha, and they were exiled, and lots of Pythagoras's close, advisors and disciples were killed. So it was a big mess. But yeah, when you read the Republic, once you know that, well, then it becomes pretty clear that he, like Plato, is putting forth Pythagoras's city as the ideal city. That's what he's actually talking about. And yes, he changes the basic doctrine because he has his own personal views, the whole ideas thing, but he's not basing himself on nothing, at all. He's built this ideal city based on something he actually knew, okay, or had heard about, like 3 generations before it had happened, okay, so not that long before. He could still talk to people who had known about it, essentially, directly, okay? So why did Plato choose Pythagoras's city as the ideal city? Well, the short version is that there is a strong reason to believe that he was a disciple of Pythagoras, and maybe he was a bad disciple, maybe he misunderstood the doctrines or whatever. We don't know that, but that is clearly where the inspiration came from, not only politically, but for a lot of, let us say, his philosophical project, his general teachings. Okay, and again, once I had read The Life of Pythagoras by Porphyry, I did have one of those, oh my God, end of Usual Suspect, who is Kaiser Sose moments, right? Like the dropping your cup and everything in slow motion and seeing the pieces assembled, and one of those things. So there are other elements of the Pythagoras doctrine which you can see echoes in Plato, and the fact that I don't know if it's his school, but one of the big philosophical schools in Athens at the time had written on like the porch, like the front door, let no one enter here, like the school of philosophy, let no one enter here who has not mastered the geometry. And that becomes crucially important, because again, what I realized so I didn't think about Pythagoras at all when I started the philosophy project, because I knew what everybody does in this culture, like in this civilization. Like, I know about his theorem with a triangle, which I barely remember, okay, because we learn it in school. And what do they teach you in school? Oh yeah, Pythagoras, he was this Greek guy, and he was good with geometry, and that's basically it. He was a Greek thinker, but all those Greek thinkers, it's all old stuff. And yeah, he was good with triangles. Yeah. So Pythagoras studied with the Egyptians. This is again here. There's also another Life of Pythagoras I haven't read, by Iamblichus here, which I will mention in a second. But it seems like the tradition is that Pythagoras studied with the Egyptians, which is to say he learned like the Egyptian priests, So he learned theurgy, like contact with the gods, what we would call today magic, or either like ceremonial magic. So either that or it's not exactly shamanism, because it's not the same category of spirit, but it's still accessing a spiritual state to contact the invisible world of gods and or spirits. And in that worldview, which is the ancient Greek worldview all the way up to Augustine, really, St. Augustine. Well, everybody acknowledges that, there's the divine realm and there's the human realm, and in between there's this intermediary realm and where the spirits live, like the demons, D-A-E-M-O-N, the daemon, right? So when Socrates, in the different dialogues mentions that he's in relationship with his daemon, he's in relation with a being with the intermediary spiritual realm, which is an intercessor between him as a human and the divine realm, which is what the demons actually do. Okay, and we think they're bad because of a translation error. Okay. When we use demon as a bad term because the Christians did not want any intercessors in the invisible realm. They thought it was bad because we should only access Christ directly, and by some strange coincidence, the priests, like the Christian priests, who ended up having inordinate power. That might not have been deliberate, but yeah, that is what happened, right? So anyway, so the idea here is that we think the demons are bad, and it's ingrained in 2,000 years of Western culture that demons are evil. It's a synonymous, it's a synonym with evil, like demons. But demon is just a Greek word for spirit. you know, the word for happiness in Greek is eudaimon. Maybe I'm getting the end of the word wrong, like the declension, but happiness, you know, like the pursuit of happiness is the pursuit of eudaimon. And is being in accordance with, like in relationship, in sound relation, to be, you know, harmonious with. And daimon is the spirit. Yeah. So keep that one in mind. So essentially, you know, Pythagoras' doctrine, from what we know, and he didn't write anything. He thought writing was counterproductive. So he didn't write anything, and he didn't. All his teachings were secret, which would explain why Plato didn't reveal, you know, the whole thing. But essentially, he was putting forth a way of directly being in contact with divinity, and which had something to do with, you know, theurgy and or shamanism. You know, there are hints. It's certainly something like that, you know. And it was directly linked with the numbers. Okay, that's where the geometry comes from. Okay, and again, we know that he studied with the Hebrew priests. Okay, he studied with the Egyptian, you know, Chaldean priests, and he studied with the rabbis, essentially, like the Kabbalists, the old school Kabbalists of like 500, 600, you know, mostly 600 BC. And again, we know this because that's what the biographers of antiquity tell us and what the tradition tells us, okay? And it might not be true, you know, just the fact that people say it is doesn't mean it's true. Like people say that Jesus studied with the Egyptian priests, and there is no indication that that is true. But the fact is that if you've studied Kabbalah, you know, like Hebrew Kabbalism or the Christian version of it, and you read about the few tidbits we have of Pythagoras' basic mathematical mysticism, it's directly, almost a direct translation of Kabbalism. Okay? And this is like, this has profound consequences, which we will mention in other videos. But, you know, the fact is that I spent a long time doing ceremonial magic. I did that. I studied Kabbalah, you know. I learned the Hebrew alphabet. I learned the basics of, you know, gematria, you know, calculating the value of the words and stuff like that, you know. I spent some time, at least, reading the Old Testament in Hebrew. I mean, I didn't get very far. I only really made it through the first sentence because I did not learn the whole grammar and vocabulary, just basics of it. But I did read enough of the whole work, the structure at least of the Old Testament, to be aware of the numerous idiosyncrasies of that text, which give a lot of credence to the fact that it is an esoteric text. Actually, it has an overt message, the Old Testament, and a hidden message, which is hidden, you know, in the letters and the numbers. The whole, again, Kabbalistic thing, which feels completely crazy unless you look at it, and then you're like, well, that's pretty much what it looks like. If you've seen Pi, the first Darren Aronofsky movie, which is really good, they go into a lot of detail there, and that gives a good idea. So yeah, and that idea of having an overt message and a hidden message, okay, that is very much in keeping with what we know of Pythagoras as teaching, and I had read, you know, people say, no, I had read that some people believe that Plato was doing that, and I did not believe it, and I'm still skeptical about that. But I do think now it makes a lot of sense as a hypothesis because of the whole republic thing. Anyway, where I'm getting at is that I studied magic, which is a shameful thing, but it shouldn't be. And I did the ceremonies and all that stuff, which was actually time well spent. And one of the first things that surprised me when I read Aristotle's Physics was that everything in ceremonial magic, really, even so-called Wicca, which is actually just a reimagining of Celtic, or pagan, religion based on the Western occult tradition, which is mostly actually derived from, again, the Kabbalists and stuff like that. But actually, what it is really derived from is, the Kabbalists. So also Pythagoras, actually, for the reason I just mentioned, but certainly like the Kabbalists. But also, astrology and all that stuff. And I don't believe that the stars tell us, what's going to happen today, or like the newspaper version of astrology. But the fact is that, at least in antiquity, it was considered part of, physics and of philosophy, essentially. And that is still part of like so-called occult philosophy, but so is the elements and all that stuff, fire, air, and all that. And what is that? That is Aristotle's physics. Okay. And again, the short version is that I discovered that this entire mystical tradition, New Agey thing is actually, it is directly linked, as they semi-claim, it is directly linked to Egypt, okay, in part, but the part they don't say, to Greek philosophy, okay? And, okay, so theurgy, ceremonies to contact the gods, okay? Well, okay, so this is Porphyry, okay, this is a fragment of a text that we don't have anymore, but where it's on theology and theurgy, okay, and he's a Neoplatonist, and he believes that theurgy is wrong or bad because, anyway, I have yet to read it, but basically he acknowledges it exists, but he thinks it's a bad idea because we can contact nefarious spirits, not necessarily evil, but like trickster spirits, essentially, okay? But he still believes that we have a daimon, a positive daimon, right? Like an intercessor, a spiritual intercessor, that each and every one of us has one. And you know what that is? That is the holy guardian angel in ceremonial magic. Okay? The whole point of making magic is to attain that direct knowledge and conversation with the holy guardian angel. So what does that mean? It means establishing contact with a daimon, which is what Jungian individuation is. Carl Jung, okay, that's like the individuation process. That's what you're essentially doing, okay, and the repercussions of that, okay. And so this is Iamblichus' Mystery of the Egyptians, and this is like the companion piece. These two works, like Porphyry wrote a letter to Iamblichus, who was in favor of theurgy, so ceremonial magic to contact the gods, as a means of spiritual attainment. And so he's writing to him to say, yeah, you're doing all these Egyptian rites, but you shouldn't. You should be trying to directly contact the higher realms of divinity, directly, okay? And so Iamblichus answered that no, theurgy is very good, But and he won actually historically, from what I understand, Iamblichus, in terms of like the Neoplatonicians. We still have his entire text, and people kept reading that one, whereas we don't have Porphyry's entire text because Porphyry lost that debate. However, historically, he did, it seems to me, end up winning because this is Augustine, this is the Confessions, but in City of God, which is the foundational text in many ways of Christian philosophy. Okay, not Christian as in Christ, but as in the institution, the religion. And what does he say? He says all demons are bad, and you shouldn't contact them, and none of that stuff. You need to you need to contact the gods directly. And he's essentially kind of restating the Porphyry position, okay? Except that instead of the higher realm of the ideas of the Neoplatonists, he's saying it needs to be Christ, right? But the Christ as he sees it. Now I'm going to spoil a little bit here of the the point of our whole human existence. Well, not the whole thing, obviously. I don't know the point of the whole thing, but I will tell you this. So Christ is a metaphor for you. I'm sorry to be blunt, but the story of Christ is your story. This is pure Carl Jung. Again, he says, like, he expounds on this profusely. And it's like if you like, an allegory to your inner realization, okay, like psychological, but it has a huge spiritual aspect to it. And you attain that by, you know, what I call, because I have a training, if you like, in ceremonial magic, knowledge and conversation with the holy guardian angel. Okay, so your deep spirit, your deeper self, your daimon. You see? And once you have that, you you kind of form a link with your deepest, truest self, and you become like a more integrated person, and you keep on integrating throughout your life. But having done that, you have become an individual, and now you can be of service to the world, you see. So there's this guy called Peter Kingsley who wrote a lot about the pre-Socratics, and he wrote about Carl Jung, and I think his last book, he's still alive, but his last book was called Catafalque, which means a monument to the dead, and it's based on a series of visions he had after working for a long time with the pre-Socratics as a direct spiritual tradition and practice. And also with Carl Jung, the Red Book, which he considers, rightly so, as a prophetic book. And so Catafalque, the Peter Kingsley book, the subtitle is something, the end of humanity. And his point really is that Western civilization has failed. It had a divine, like it had a spiritual mission, a civilizational mission, and it totally failed. And he received that message through a series of very intense experiences. And like shamanic, essentially, experiences, which life sends you when it needs people to to say stuff like that. Now, I don't believe that we're witnessing the end of humanity, but there's a chance we might. And I do think we'll make it through. I don't think there's really any hope for Western civilization. but what has been lost needs to be dug out, you know. It needs to be rediscovered. And so this is like a form of renaissance, if you like, project. And there's good indications that we are in a form of renaissance. But like, what are we being reborn to? Like, what are we rediscovering that was lost of the original impetus that, you know, animated Western civilization? Okay, what was part of Pythagoras' project that was lost? Well, I'm not sure we know. I know I don't. Not in a rational sense. And again, it needs to be rediscovered. And we do need to acknowledge just how catastrophic the situation is, and just how deep that catastrophe truly is. And it took me many years just to accept that, like 10 years basically, just to accept that. But that's because of the, again, the depth of the ravine. So the point here is that you have a daimon, you have a spiritual intercessor, because you're a human being, and it is trying to contact you. And you also have a lot of spirit helpers, and spirit helpers love helping us. And it is true that there are trickster spirits. And it is true that some of the helping spirits will definitely let you make extremely painful errors with a smile on their invisible faces, not because they're mean, but because they know something that you don't about the true nature of who you are. So that's a topic. But you know, I like Heidegger a lot, and Heidegger, his whole thing was that philosophy had forgotten, like the question of being, the primordial question. It had forgotten its initial, you know, project and questioning. I mean, yeah, I pretty much believe that he was right, and I think not only can we directly associate that with the fact that as a civilization we very quickly forgot that philosophy came from this search for wisdom, okay, from Pythagoras, and the search for wisdom which comes from becoming who you truly are, you know, knowing yourself, gnosis auton, right? Well, how do you do that? You do that by accessing your deepest self, not your illusory self, like your deepest self. Okay, and that's the whole work of philosophy. That's being wise, becoming wise. Okay, and as far as I'm concerned, reading Kant and Hegel is part of that. Okay, because it helps a lot in training your mental, and that's very useful, actually. Okay. But there's more to it than that. And I think that not only Heidegger is right on a button when he says that philosophy forgot its initial question and the importance of it, because I think that's directly linked to the Pythagoras issue. And he did say philosophy was dead, Heidegger. So there's something to meditate on here. But he was still calling for something to come afterwards, you see. So again, I think that's something we should keep in mind. But it says something that Heidegger was so preoccupied with that question. And we find that throughout history, there has never been a time when somebody didn't try to reconnect humanity, certainly, like in particular in the West, with this thing it had forgotten about itself, so that it could, reignite the relationship, or, just reaffirm, the connection, and start figuring out just what it is we're actually supposed to be doing here. And we sure made a lot of terrible mistakes. I know I did. But I do know we're immensely helped and loved a lot more than we can possibly conceive of and imagine. And if there was a wrong historically and spiritually, it does seem to me that it is trying to be righted, to correct itself. And I think that's what we're called to do. So whatever talents we have, we need to express that, and whatever intuitions we have to follow those. And the trick is distinguishing between, intuitions and, fancies, if you like. So that's not easy sometimes, but the flavor is different. Anyway, the core thing is that the history of philosophy and the entirety of philosophy is directly linked with things that we consider, dishonorable and sulfurous and stupid, which is to say woo-woo stuff, mystical stuff like magic and spirits and all those things. But no, that is at the core of philosophy. And sure, logic as we mean it. I mean, Peter Kingsley doesn't think so. He thinks that Aristotle's logic is a betrayal, and but I don't. I think it's very useful and necessary. And all those things are part of it. I mean, Marx, I think, is super important, Karl Marx. Okay, even though he's as far removed as you can possibly be from stuff like theurgy, right? So it's all part of the whole. It's all part of the figuring out how to live as true human beings, like worthy human beings. That whole project. But for those of us who are willing to go there, the time has come for us to acknowledge that part of Western, culture and civilization, and philosophy, and human experience, which is, again, what we'll call here the whole invisible realm, and the spirits and all that stuff. So we need to do that, and we also need to take some time to consider the immensity of this catastrophic gulch in front of us, but also maybe this mystery we're part of, and which we are, in a sense, expressing and revealing through our intuitions. And so shamanism and magic and all that stuff, that is 1000% part of philosophy. And it's part of who we are as a species and as, human beings. I guess that's it for me today. I have a Patreon if you want to support my work. I hope you're doing great, you're doing well. I will certainly make videos on these books when I'm finished reading them, and other stuff, like I'm reading the Stoics. So anyway, more to come. Until then, take care of yourselves, follow your heart. Yeah, do not despair. Things are hard. But, yeah. Take care. See you soon. Bye.